This is Bob's friend who's helping us out and enabling us to be here. And this is my wife's granddad. So he's also fought in the World War II, but he's a ground pounder. That's who.
I know. I will say this. You don't have to be a commissioned officer to be a gentleman.
And route the target. What was your thoughts then? Of course, you were flying and thinking about staying information and stuff.
Yeah.
But anything else?
No, actually, of course, the ground troops kept moving away from us.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, we were over friendly territory, and I don't. It was just a pleasant flight. We just make sure everything was working properly. We had to arm our bombs. In other words, we had to pull the lever to arm the bomb so it would explode when dropped. We weren't supposed to arm our bombs until we knew we were over enemy territory.
Right.
So I don't know. You just relaxed, and then suddenly you had to be careful because, well, to be honest with you, we knew there was a possibility of enemy aircraft, but we were still over Belgian territory. So if the wingman is doing his job, he's swiveling. And by the way, I'll tell one story here. I gave a talk to a high school class, a college class about 2 or 3 years ago, and I wore my leather jacket that I salvaged from the war. It had a P-47 painted on the back. I wore my white scarf. And I asked the college group, and there were more women than men, why do you think I wore this white scarf? They thought for a minute. It looked good?
Yeah.
They couldn't figure it out. I said, for a very practical reason. Without it,
it's cold.
No, you swiveled your head and you would wear a rash. That leather would produce a rash on your neck. So you had to wear a scarf. At another class, someone noted that my flight jacket had a whistle attached. So the question before the college crowd, why on earth did wear this whistle on my leather jacket when I went into combat? They all looked at each other. They were puzzled. When I got to England, this was a British whistle given to every fighter pilot. Why? Because if you flew over the English Channel and you went down in the water, the rescue boat couldn't see you because the earth is round. Right. So you blew your whistle so the rescue boat could find you.
Oh, really? Wow.
Very practical.
Yeah. Let's see. Johnny asks, how did you and your friends flying evolve over time? How did the discussions go, and were there any significant changes in tactics and whatnot over time?
No. Remember, my tour was for 36 mission was from January to May. I will say that things got interested for me personally at the end of the war because we ended at in a base in Germany called Fritzlar that was on the edge of what was to be the Russian Soviet zone of occupation. About a week after the war, when my unit, the 404th, was scheduled to be relocated to Japan. Of course, that was canceled with the atomic bomb. But anyway, headquarters asked for volunteers of officers to go into what was to be the Soviet zone and get what we wanted before the Soviets got there. which was against an agreement, but everybody played it the same way.
Yeah.
I volunteered, and I went in with the zone that included the V2 rocket family
Oh, really?
facility.
Mhm.
That was in a cavern untouched by the war, but the Army Air Forces was late in doing that. And when I got there, U.S. Army Ordnance had already moved over 100 German rockets and Holland in part out. So they left nothing for the Army Air Forces except a bunch of litter and the smell of dying slave laborers. And I never forgot that. And since World War II, I've been on the trail of German war criminals that killed, tortured, starved, beat to death slave labor, of which most of the war criminals were never punished.
Right.
And I'm giving a talk Tuesday about one named General Hans Kammler, who's one of the worst war criminals of World War II, and he died in bed at the age of 79.
Yeah. And you talk about this in your books as well, right?
Yes. I did a lot of writing after the war because total happenstance. I went to work for the White Sands Missile Range and met some of the Germans that were brought to this country, and I met the officer that escorted the Germans. I knew the officer that brought the V2 bombs, and I became the director of training, and I gave a talk to all new employees about the German-American rocket program. So I did a lot of research, I did a lot of interviews, and I became well knowledgeable about the German rocket program and the use of slave labor, and I've never forgotten.
Did you fly anything after the war?
No, and that was one of my biggest mistakes because after the war we had what was known as a GI Bill. All got paying allowances to go to college, and unfortunately I went to a school I was in the reserves, but there was no air base nearby, and I didn't have an automobile, couldn't afford one. So I was taken off flight status, even though I was promoted to captain. But that was a big mistake. I should have gone to a college where I could. If you were in the reserves, you could fly twice a month and keep your flight status and get paid. And boy, did I need the money.
Yeah. Johnny runs off with thank you, Bob, for everything.
Okay.
And here's Moldy. He's from Germany. Thanks from a German guy born in West Germany in 1983. I grew up under American influence instead of a regime, in freedom and not in oppression, and made friends across the ocean. And I am very thankful for that.
And let me respond by saying that my German grandparents were born in East Germany, but I got out before Hitler.
That's good. Goblin asks, how well coordinated were the flights, and did you get radar coverage and support in the front line?
Yeah, I think so. Fortunately, my group developed reunions in the 1970s, and we became very active. So we became very close friends. There's only two of us left from the group. As far as I know, Captain Floyd Blair flew over D-Day, and he's now 103, and I'm 99 in June, and we correspond and talk to each other regularly. And he's got a great story to tell if he would only tell it. He was in the flight that escorted Eisenhower across the channel after we had gained a foothold in Normandy.
Right. I think Goblin's question is more related to when you were there. Did you have support in terms of radar coverage and stuff like that?
Not really.
Not really.
No,
Pretty much
that
on
was
your
too
own.
primitive. It was, no, we had communications, but that's, no. And insofar as I knew, the ability to communicate by radio was about the best.
Yeah.
We had a guy in the tower with directions. He was good. And we recently in our newsletter gave credit to him for saving lives because he could get us home.
Yeah.
That was the best they could do.
Yeah. Jack asks, or do you think you would be able to fly today? And if so, how well?
I hate to going up in an aircraft. No, I was given the controls once by a private pilot, and I just didn't feel comfortable.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
you got to stay with it.
Right, that makes sense. Jack Flash asks, what were your primary target types? We touched upon that,
Yeah.
but he also asks, how were they defended?
Oh, those air bases. Yeah, that 88 millimeter. That was our worst enemy. We, as I say, most of the German fighters were vectored to attack bombers.
Hmm.
And it was only, there was one time I was flying wing and I spotted an ME-109 flying on the deck. And I called the flight leader and gave him the word, enemy aircraft, 3 o'clock low. And the leader said, okay, go get him. But don't stay too long to rejoin the flight. So I peeled off, and unfortunately, I took my eyes off of him, and he ducked into a valley, and I couldn't stay around to find him, so I had to rejoin the group. That would have been a dead duck if I'd have kept my eyes on him. I couldn't have missed him. But other than in that encounter with an ME-262 that managed to escape my wrath is the only time.
Did you ever have to leave an aircraft mid-flight?
No.
No.
No, wait a minute. Leave
Mid-flight.
the aircraft?
Yeah. Jump out?
No.
No.
Fortunately, no.
Good. Bambi here asks, which variant did you fly, and did you feel confident sitting in a P-47 when you faced the Germans?
Oh, no. No, my training was such that I felt I could defeat anybody.
Yeah.
And that's what the instructor wanted in training.
Hmm.
Bob Johnson had 27 victories. One of them, after the victory, an FW-190 got on his tail and shot the hell out of his plane, but he couldn't knock him down.
Mm-hmm.
That aircraft took everything he threw, including 20 millimeter shells, and it got home safely. If you have access to the memoir by Robert S. Johnson called Thunderbolt, he tells that story. It's unbelievable. That was the roughest, toughest aircraft, I think, in the air in World War II.
Nice.
I'm biased.
Yeah, of course. Bambi also asks, did you always respect the engine limits, or did you sometimes push the engine harder than the manual allowed?
No, I did. Whenever you had, I sometimes forget the name, but you had the ability, you had a supercharger, which shot liquid to cool that engine to give you a burst. The mechanics hated you to do that because they had to redo it. So I only used it once.
Okay.
I came off a target, and I guess it was an airfield, but it's dusk when the anti-aircraft fire, and I looked out and I'm surrounded, and I just got that supercharger to get the hell out of there. And when I reported that to the crew chief, he shook his head. They had to take that whole engine apart.
Well, at least you came back, so.
But I don't think he welcomed me. No, I'm joking.
How was she to fly at very high altitude?
Oh, that's you. The higher you got, we could go as above 30,000 feet. It was a high altitude fun, but once you get up there, it's tough. We didn't. We normally flew as low as 10,000 feet to 20,000 feet.
Mm.
Escort had to go up with the bombers, but I never escorted a heavy bomber.
No.
And even the medium bombers, no more than 20,000 feet. So, but in training, I flew at 30,000, and I don't like it.
Right. The P-47 was renowned for its ruggedness and ability to sustain battle damage, just like you touched upon, and still bring the pilot home safely. Were you ever hit by enemy fire? And if so, can you tell us a bit about your thoughts when it happened?
No, I only recall some minor. No, I lucked out.
Okay.
And that's luck's important. As I say, my wingman got hit by anti-aircraft fire. I flew over the same area behind him and I didn't get hit. You got to be lucky.
Yeah. So Insop asks, he's from Norway, by the way. Did you ever see any air-to-air combat?
Other than the time we encountered this ME-262 twin, I would call that combat, but no, they had the edge. There was no way we could compete with a twin engine jet bomber. No.
And how would you evaluate? He also asks, or the question is, how was your situation awareness compared to the enemies? Maybe that's hard to answer, but
I really don't know. I will say this: one of the pilots in my group, not in my squadron, but in the 508s, in the fall of 1944, just before I got there, they ran into a large flight of Luftwaffe fighters, and this guy destroyed 6 of them.
Oh, wow.
Now, how he did that, we finally figured out that he when you get into combat, you break up. Hopefully your elements stay together, but really everybody's on their own. He got behind a flight of 6, and we finally figured out it was probably 3 elements. Now, normally the Germans flew, they flew 3 rather than 2. So there were 2 flights of 3, and he came up behind them, and he shot down 2, and we figured out they were the 2 leaders of the training flight, and the new pilots ran into each other.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, they panicked, and he destroyed 2, and the other 4 ran into each other. Well, he caused it, so he got credit for all 6. And the head of the 9th Air Force awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross. That's the second highest for that. Now, he was lucky.
Yeah.
If that had not been a training flight, he would have had a hard time if that had been 6 experience.
Yeah. And speaking of air-to-air combat, in training, how did the P-47 compare to other fighters of the time?
As I say, I lucked out. I trained for aerial combat under a guy with 26 victories.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to take us up to simulate aerial combat. And honest to God, he seemed to know where every aircraft was. See, this is that talent that you don't hear about, but so important.
Yeah.
And we had some great simulated aerial battles.
Did you ever fight anything else, or was it just a Thunderbolt against a Thunderbolt? Any dissimilar?
I never flew a Mustang. I only flew the over-the-hill P-40 and the P-47. So I was strictly a P-47 pilot.
And you didn't train against Mustangs? Or...
Oh, no. By the way, I wrote some good fiction about that.
Okay.
I wrote some fiction about that because the Mustang pilot in simulated combat lost control of his aircraft and crashed. And it really happened. What happened, the Mustang had a baffle to divide two tanks. So when one tank was getting empty, you had to switch on the, well, there was a baffle between them that broke loose. And suddenly all of that fuel together destroyed the center of gravity of the aircraft, and the pilot lost control. The Mustang was a very beautiful aircraft, but very fragile.
Right.
It was great for aerial combat if you had the talent. It was terrible for ground. They tried to get them to fly down and support ground troops. And they go, oh no, we don't want to do that. And then I don't blame them. It wasn't built for that.
Right. What armament did you prefer and why?
I'll tell you, we normally, if we were going on a bombing, if Arm Wisconsin, we carried 2 500-pound. That was typical. But sometimes, and I had two, our armament, well, we had the 850s, was napalm.
Okay.
And that's terrible. First place, it was nothing but a tin cup full of highly volatile liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And when you dropped it, it was supposed to have a detonator, but sometimes that pulled loose and suddenly you're on fire. We didn't have that happen to us, but we heard talk of it. But hitting a target with napalm, you couldn't do it. It went down like a leaf. It was used effectively on large spread out railway centers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could get there and drop the napalm, you could set that whole area on fire.
Yeah.
But it was a terrible weapon.
So you preferred the ordinary bombs?
Oh, absolutely.
What about rockets?
Yes, we had only one squadron armed with rockets. That was 4, and it would fire in twos. You had 2 loads. The 508 had capability. We did not have it in mind, but we borrowed aircraft from them to give each pilot experience. And I fired rockets once. And the trouble with the rockets, the dry fuel did not burn properly. And sometimes that's why they were experimenting with liquid.
Okay. Yeah.
And mine burned well, and I sunk a barge.
Oh, really?
Those 2 of my 4 rockets hit that barge, and that's pretty successful. But I say, solid fuel rockets were used by the French in World War I, and but you just couldn't trust them. Right. That's why they weren't used very often. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe they did against the bombers. I don't know.
Would you like to tell me more about the mission when you lost your wingman?
Well, there's not much to tell except we knew where the airfield was. I think, if I remember correctly, that was my 23rd mission out of 36. And the element leader was a captain who had completed service in the Far East and then transferred to Europe. And they flew differently because many cases they attacked at targets over water where there's no guns.
Right.
So he came to us, and because he was a captain, he was an element leader, and I followed him. He took me into that target of the airfield flying low like he did over water. Yeah. What we normally would do, we would dive down to hit the target, cut loose on the target, then zoom away.
Right.
But he didn't fly that way.
So his ingress
And-
was low. Yeah.
Right, he got himself killed.
Yeah.
He almost got me
Yeah,
killed.
right. What was that? Was that the only time you flew with him, or had you flown with him a couple of times before
I
that?
don't remember flying him.
Okay.
Of course, I didn't fly after because he was dead.
No. Right.
Yeah, no, I don't remember.
Hmm.
It's possible because it could have been a different kind of mission
Yeah.
where we didn't have any aircraft fire.
Right.
It could have been just an arm. I don't know, but
At least it wasn't a like personal close friend to you.
oh no.
No.
Well, not
I mean,
really.
he was a pilot and everything, but
Yeah.
yeah.
He was a nice guy, but he flew too low.
What and Apollo, the man we talked to before, who helped us out with the technology, he asked, what was the best thing with the P-47 specifically for you?
I'd say it's ruggedness,
Ruggedness.
but it was so on close attacks. You knew you were better off than most pilots,
Yeah.
because it was so rugged. But when you got up in the air, say at 20,000 feet, it was a great aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel like it weighed 7 tons.
Right.
I wish I'd flown a Spitfire or a Mustang to make the comparison. But as my instructor, Bob Johnson, said, it's a doll in the air. It's perfect for aerial combat. And P-47s destroyed more German aircraft in aerial combat than the Mustang, and people don't seem to know that.
Right. And I realize this might be a hard one because, of course, the P-47 is your baby and everything. But if you could fix something with it, what was the worst thing with it?
What was the worst?
Like, were there any like that one annoying thing that you would like if they ever could fix that thing?
I'll be honest, I can't think.
Pretty much perfect.
No, I've read a lot of books of P-47. I don't recall ever reading anybody saying they wish it. Now, I'm sure that Mustang pilots all wished it was a little tougher.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful aircraft. But so what?
Right. Okay. Was she hard to fly? Did she bite back, like causing an aggressive stall or spin?
No, it had so much power. No, the power plant matched the air. In other words, they were welded together beautifully.
Yeah.
We had that 200 horsepower, which was fantastic. Now they did make a few improvements. They had skinny blades, and they later had paddle blades.
Mm-hmm.
You got a greater bite, and they gave you. There would be the where the cockpit was built into the frame. You lack some visibility. So
Right.
that's true, and that's why they came out with the bubble. If you had your neck on a swivel, they couldn't sneak up on you. But that earlier model, which I flew, the visibility wasn't the best. You had a mirror, but what the hell good was that?
Did you use radio between units?
Yes, in the air.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, and I'll confess, we were on the way to a mission once, and we had by then the units had gotten well ahead of us, and we were over friendly territory, and I was what they call tail end Charlie. I was the last man in the flight, and you had codes. The flight leader was red 1, his element leader 2, my element leader red 3, and I'm red 4. I'm tail end Charlie, and I got this flight. I kept falling behind, and finally I heard the flight leader, Red 4, get your ass up here. And I had to get up here.
Speaking of call signs, did you use any other call signs? except from the red 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, I think they
Okay.
changed all the time. I don't. I have my flight records, and I could probably answer that just by showing it. Yeah, you use code, and you had to use code in the air.
Did you have any problems or malfunctions with your P-47?
Yes,
Um,
either bad manufacturing or bad maintenance. One was when whoever put that hydraulic fluid gauge in the cockpit didn't fasten it properly and it broke loose. Probably on the ground, and the crews didn't check it. The second was when my generator malfunctioned, and I don't know why, but it did. So that was the two in training emergencies. But I had no emergencies in combat. I can't remember any, except when I went off the runway.
oh yeah.
Oh, let me interject briefly.
Yep.
The most fantastic story of my group and any group, my flight leader's name was Wright. Wright came off an arm reconnaissance mission, and a 20 millimeter shell had gone through one of the blades of his prop. It was so perfect. I remember that spinning. There was about an inch on each side. Had it moved over, it would have snapped.
Oh, wow.
But he landed, and there's this hole. And there's photographs of that. And it's a beautiful shot. It's just unbelievable. Mathematically, that had to be 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,001, because a little bit over, and he would have been in enemy territory on the ground.
Yeah.
Beautiful shot. That. By the way, that was published in Life magazine.
Oh, really?
One of the great pictorial magazines of the war. There's a picture of him with that hole in the prop.
Yeah. Again, you got to be lucky, right?
Oh boy.
Hardo says, in media like Top Gun, the pilots are usually depicted like cocky guys with giant egos. What was your experience with other pilots in World War II? Was it big egos and cockiness, or were most people just there to win the war and do as well as they could?
Egos. You got to understand, non-wars, we were called juvenile delinquents. We were cocky, and we were meant to be. Yeah. You had to feel that. If you were a worrier, you couldn't be a fighter pilot. As I say, the worst pilot pilots are those that have an imagination. We had one pilot that an FW-190 got on his tail, and that steel behind the pilot's back caught all that. That guy couldn't fly for a couple of weeks. His imagination is what might have happened. Finally, the operations officer put him in a Jeep, rode out to the end of on the field, and gave him a look. I know you're scared. We're all scared. Right. But you can't think about it. You got to concentrate on what you're doing. Forget what happened. Well, the lesson worked, because he was able to climb into that aircraft after that. He flew a combat mission. Totally changed. Okay. His ego returned.
Okay, that's good. Gremlin asks, how was the maintenance aspects of the P-47? Did you have to switch aircraft a lot between sorties because repairs were needed?
No, I don't think so. No, I really wasn't in a position, because before and after, when the maintenance was going on, I was to be found at the bar. And I did most of my work at that time.
Right.
I came to enjoy scotch, but no. Now, had I had my own aircraft, I would have stayed very close to that crew chief. Right. You got to be buddies, because you got to depend on him. If he's no good, you're no good.
Right. So two final questions here. Did you have days when many planes were grounded because of maintenance and repairs, or did your squadron always have a lot of P-47s to utilize?
I don't think we had any great number of problems. We always had a 2 or 3 aircraft with necessary engine changes, but that would be a good question for a squadron commander. But I don't, from my point of view, I think we lucked out. Remember, the Americans had the luxury of size and resources.
Right. And you touch upon this, but he also asks, were you good friends with the aircraft technicians, and did you have good faith in them and their work?
Well, as I said, I didn't have my own aircraft, but I can tell you this, and I got to be very close to the squadron commander named Hal Shook, who's passed on, but I got to know him very well after the war. He lived close by here, and he was one that spent most of his time with the ground crews, and he was one of the better leaders because he recognized the importance of the ground crews, and since he's long gone, I'll tell you. So he was such a great pilot, and he really knew his aircraft. When he was a colonel, headed towards becoming a general, he was ferrying a B-25, and he had an Army ground officer just feeling comfortable, Hal decided to slow roll the B-25, which he could do. You can put a glass there and it won't spill.
Right.
Well, that Army officer in there saw these clouds, and he reported him, and they court-martialed Hal Shook for putting the crew at risk, and he missed becoming a general because of that. That's a true story.
Yeah, luck comes in again, I guess.
Yeah, also, you be careful.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. So we scheduled 45 minutes for this, and we've been on for more than 1.5 hours.
I better go see my wife.
Yeah, but from all of us, I'm so happy we could do this. We are most grateful. So thank you so much. Do you have any parting shots?
Yes.
Yeah.
Read my book, Love and War.
Yeah.
It's a nonfiction book, and I loved writing it. And most of it is actually based on my experience.
We will post the link to that in the chat.
They don't have to read the one coming out this fall because it's to get into the record, but that's all. Yeah. Okay, well, I better hurry because I better get with.
Okay, see you.
Where's my? There it is. Okay, hey, have a good flight. I know you will. Now, do what I did when I was a pilot. Look up in the cockpit, and if you see any red marks and the needle is past it, bail out.
Okay. Take care, Miss Huddleston.